Artemis Bastion had never been built for war. It sat in the sea of tranquility like a silver promise, its domes gleaming under the hard sunlight of the lunar morning. From Earth, it was little more than a bright cluster on a grey plain. But to the 12,000 people who lived there, Artemis was a city. It was home. It was school bells echoing through steel corridors, greenhouse workers coaxing green life from lunar dust, engineers arguing over reactor output, and children pressing their hands against observation glass to watch Earth hanging blue and beautiful in the black sky. For 30 years, Artemis Bastion had been humanity's proudest off-world achievement. It mined helium-3, studied deep space physics, and served as a symbol to the galaxy that humans came not only as survivors, but as builders. Even after first contact, even after the star maps were redrawn and alien empires revealed themselves, Artemis remained unarmed by interstellar standards. A few defense cannons, patrol craft, enough to discourage pirates, nothing more. The Varkashi Dominion knew that. At 9:14 station time, the first alert came from the far side listening array. Unknown signatures. Multiple vessels. Too many. Their emergence point alone made every officer in Artemis Command go cold. The Varkashi fleet had hidden behind the moon itself, using the bulk of the lunar body to block Earth's early warning systems. By 9:16, the threat board was full of crimson. By 9:17, Commander Lena Ortez was in the central control ring, staring at the tactical display as 13 enemy warships fanned out over the horizon. "Open a channel," she ordered. A Varkashi face appeared above the command dais, scaled and gold-eyed, wearing the iron crest of a Dominion war prefect. His expression held the calm certainty of someone discussing weather, not mass death. "This is Prefect Sol of the Varkashi Dominion," he said. "Artemis Bastion has been designated a strategic provocation and unlawful expansion point. You will power down all systems and prepare for occupation." Lena looked at the civilian casualty projections already crawling up her screen. "There are families here. Research staff. Children." The prefect did not blink. "Your species was warned about encroachment." She knew then this was never meant to be an occupation. "Evacuation?" one of her officers asked quietly. She checked the launch grid. Too few transports. Too little time. The nearest Earth defense group was hours away. "No," she said, her voice tightening. "They planned this." Across Artemis Bastion, alarms began to howl. In the education dome, teachers herded frightened children beneath emergency bulkheads. In the agricultural ring, workers abandoned trays of bright green lettuce and sprinted for shelters. Trains stopped mid-tunnel. Medical staff sealed operating rooms and dimmed lights to emergency red. On every internal screen, Commander Ortez appeared with a face pale from fury but steady with command. "This is command," she said. "All personnel to hardened sections immediately. This is not a drill." Outside, the Varkashi fleet moved into firing formation. Earth saw it live. Millions watched emergency feeds from lunar cameras as black warships rose against the horizon like blades. In New York, Lagos, Karachi, Sao Paulo, and Tokyo, people stopped in streets and offices to stare at screens. In orbit, civilian freighters turned their sensors moonward. Across Earth's defense network, commands began to fly too late, too slow, against an attack already in motion. At 9:21, Prefect Sol gave the order. The first antimatter warhead hit the western dome. For a heartbeat, Artemis Bastion became a second sun. Glass, steel, concrete, and flesh vanished in white fire. Shock waves rolled across the regolith, hurling transports like toys. The research spires disappeared. The central tram line split open. Domes burst one after another, venting atmosphere, debris, and human lives into the void. The colony's beacon flashed wildly, then died. A second barrage followed. Then a third. By the time Earth's satellites cleared the glare, Artemis Bastion was gone, reduced to molten scars and expanding dust over grey lunar soil. No surrender had been requested. No troops had landed. No military objective had been taken. It had been an execution. And on Earth, as billions stared at the ashes of their first city beyond home, humanity said nothing at all. The silence was far more terrifying than grief. For 6 minutes after Artemis Bastion died, no one on Earth seemed able to breathe. Broadcast networks across the planet replayed the destruction in stunned loops. The gleaming lunar domes, the rising black silhouettes of Arkeshi warships, the impossible white flash that swallowed everything. Commentators who had spent careers talking through disasters sat speechless. In homes, in cafes, in military barracks, in orbital stations, human beings stared at the end of their moon city and waited for someone to tell them this was a mistake. No one did. In Geneva, the emergency chamber of the United Nations went into immediate session. In Washington, Beijing, Islamabad, Moscow, Brasilia, Delhi, and dozens of other capitals, heads of state were rushed into fortified command centers buried beneath concrete and stone. Secure lines lit up across the globe, linking governments that had spent generations distrusting one another. Old rivalries vanished in a single hour. There were no blocks now, no East and West, no competing interests. There was only Earth. Deep beneath the Atlantic, inside a command complex carved into the bedrock below the mid-ocean defense grid, the people with the power to decide humanity's response gathered around a circular table of black steel. Presidents, prime ministers, admirals, intelligence chiefs, and defense ministers took their places under the dim blue glow of a suspended lunar hologram. Artemis Bastion flickered there for a moment as it had been that morning. Intact domes, transit rails, glowing habitation rings, before the image shifted to its present state, a cratered smear of molten ruin. No one spoke for several seconds. Then Admiral Elias Vaughan broke the silence. "Confirmed casualty estimate?" he asked. A woman from Strategic Analysis swallowed before answering. 12,106 presumed dead. We are still matching family registries, school attendance, and medical logs. There are no active life signatures remaining. The words fell into the room like stones. One of the civilian ministers, grey-faced and shaking, whispered, "Children." The analyst nodded once. 319. Across the table, a president clenched both hands so tightly the knuckles turned white. Did the Varkashi send any secondary communication? A warning? A demand? "Only the occupation statement delivered to Commander Ortez," replied the intelligence director. "Their strike pattern confirms the intent was immediate total destruction. No boarding craft. No disabling fire. No effort to seize infrastructure. Terror," someone muttered. "No," Vaughan said quietly. "Worse than terror. Instruction." All eyes turned to him. He stood, tall and iron-backed in a dark fleet uniform, and walked toward the hologram. He expanded the tactical recording with a gesture. Red arcs marked the trajectory of the Varkashi munitions. Targeting clusters bloomed over schools, medical wings, power stations, transit junctions, and civilian habitation sectors. "They didn't hit military positions first," Vaughan said. "They hit density centers. Maximum casualties. Maximum spectacle. They wanted every person on Earth to watch our people die and conclude resistance was futile." The room remained still. Then the Secretary-General asked the question everyone had come here carrying like poison. "What are our options?" A strategist activated another layer of the display. Human fleet markers appeared across the inner system. Mars patrol groups, Jovian black site shipyards, hidden defense stations in the asteroid belt, reserve carriers sleeping beneath the Pacific, stealth platforms buried inside Trojan clusters. Assets no alien intelligence service had ever fully mapped. Immediate response options range from border retaliation to full-spectrum strategic war, she said. We can target their expeditionary fleet, strike their forward bases, cripple supply corridors, or initiate decapitation operations against Varkesh Prime. Decapitation, a minister echoed. Removal of command authority, she said, at planetary scale. That finally shattered the room into argument. They murdered civilians, one leader snapped. We answer with overwhelming force, and become exactly what they think we are. Another shot back. They already think we're weak. They'll kill every human colony in range if we hesitate. If we burn a homeworld, the galaxy will unite against us. Voices rose. Hands struck the table. The hologram trembled as if even the moon itself recoiled from the fury filling the chamber. Through it all, Admiral Vaughn said nothing. At last he reached beneath the table and placed a small authorization key on the black steel surface. An old key, physical, not digital. The kind used only for powers too dangerous to trust entirely to machines. The chamber fell silent. Vaughn looked around the circle, meeting every eye in turn. 3 centuries ago, he said, after the last of Earth's resource wars, humanity drafted a doctrine so extreme it was locked behind 13 sovereign seals and never spoken of again outside continuity briefings. It was never meant to be used. It was meant to remind us what kind of line could never be crossed. He tapped the key once. The hologram changed. A single phrase appeared above the ashes of Artemis Bastion. Omega Black Protocol. When an enemy commits mass civilian extermination against a human population center beyond any reasonable military objective, Vaughn said, his voice flat as cold iron, the response is not punishment. The response is permanent elimination of the threat. No one moved. No one argued. And in that underground chamber, while the ruins of the moon burned silently above them, humanity stopped discussing whether there would be war. Now they were only deciding how absolute it would be. The order went out across human space without speeches, fanfare, or public declaration. Buried transmitters woke in the oceans. Encrypted relays flared to life beneath polar ice, inside asteroid foundries, and along abandoned stations officially listed as scrap decades earlier. Across the solar system, sealed commands reached ships that had never appeared on any public registry. Some had no names in civilian databases. Some had no crews listed at all. But every captain who received the transmission understood the same thing the moment the code resolved on their screens. Omega Black had been invoked. Near Jupiter, in the shadow of Ganymede, armored blast doors split open along the sides of an object long believed to be a mining platform. Instead, a dreadnought emerged, black-hulled, sharp-edged, and vast enough to cast a moving eclipse across the moon below. Its designation lit across command displays in cold white text, HNS Retribution. Farther in, under the rust-red glare of Mars, 3 carrier groups rose from hidden berths carved into canyon walls and accelerated hard toward the transfer lanes. In the asteroid belt, drone tenders disgorged clouds of autonomous strike craft that scattered like metallic insects into the dark. From beneath the Pacific, magnetic launch tunnels hurled stealth frigates into orbit one after another, until the night sky over Earth became a river of burning ascent trails. Humanity was not scrambling. Humanity had prepared for this for generations. Inside Fleet Command, Admiral Elias Vaughn stood before a projection of the Varkeshi frontier and watched icons bloom across the map. Every green marker was a human asset coming online. Every red marker was an enemy fleet, station, shipyard, or relay node marked for destruction. "Status," he said. "Primary battle groups assembled and accelerating," replied Commander Imoni Saad from the tactical pit. "Drone swarms are moving ahead of the fleet under stealth profiles. Border listening posts confirm the Varkashi are broadcasting victory across regional channels. They believe Earth is in political paralysis." A few officers exchanged grim looks. Vaughn did not smile. "Good. Let them keep believing that." Another officer turned from her station. "Transmission package ready for Dominion command." The Admiral considered that for a second. Then he nodded once. "Send it." Across all known military frequencies, diplomatic relays, and open Dominion channels, a single message arrived. No emblem. No anthem. No preamble. Just plain text in precise Varkashi script. "You mistook mercy for frailty. You will not make that mistake again." It was the only warning humanity gave. The first Varkashi border fleet disappeared 9 minutes later. At Caro's outpost, Dominion crews initially believed their sensors had malfunctioned. Long-range contacts flickered, vanished, and returned in impossible positions. Then their shield grid failed all at once, not from direct fire, but from a storm of infiltrator drones that had slipped inside the perimeter using harvested transponder codes. Point defense guns turned inward, targeting systems blinded themselves, and before any coherent response formed, human rail lances began striking from beyond conventional engagement range. A cruiser split open from bow to stern. A second vanished in a bloom of venting plasma. The station's command ring transmitted one final, fragmented distress call before a kinetic rod traveling at relativistic speed punched straight through its reactor core. At 2 other frontier systems, it happened again. No declarations. No drawn-out battle lines. Just sudden, surgical annihilation. The galaxy noticed fast. Trade channels flooded with panicked reports. Independent observers uploaded scattered sensor footage of Varkashi ships tumbling in pieces through the void, of human strike craft moving with terrifying coordination, of entire defense arrays going dark in less than a minute. Civilized powers that had dismissed humanity as emotional, divided, and politically soft now watched a species fight with cold-blooded precision. This was not rage without control. That would have been easier to understand. This was rage sharpened into doctrine. On Earth, the public finally saw the first fragments of the response when military analysts released confirmed images of Caro's outpost burning. There were no cheers in the streets. No celebrations. The grief was still too fresh, too raw. But something harder had settled under it now. Something ancient. Something that had lived in human history since the first village wall, the first torched home, the first grave dug for the innocent. A vow. In orbit above Lunar, salvage tugs drifted carefully over the glowing wreckage of Artemis Bastion. They found no survivors. Only broken hull plates, frozen debris, and the occasional child's toy spinning slowly against the stars. Every recovered fragment was transmitted to Fleet Command. Every fragment was logged. Every fragment was remembered. Late in the cycle, Commander Saad looked up from her console. Dominion core fleets are beginning to mobilize. They're pulling ships back to defend Varkesh Prime. Admiral Vaughn stared at the tactical map, where human fleet vectors now converged like spear points. "Exactly as planned," he said. He placed one hand on the edge of the command table and gave the order that would carry humanity fully past the point of no return. "Advance on the core." No one in the room hesitated, because the moon had not simply been attacked. On the day Artemis Bastion died, The Varkashi had done something far worse than start a war. They had taught humanity to stop holding back. By the time the human fleet entered the Varkesh system, the war was already decided. The Dominion still possessed ships, still held colonies, still commanded armies spread across dozens of worlds, but the spine of its power had been broken in 3 days of relentless human advance. Border fleets were gone. Relay stations had been silenced. Shipyards burned in orbit around shattered moons. Every route back to Varkesh Prime had become a corridor of wreckage lit by dying engines and drifting steel. Now the throne world waited. Varkesh Prime was beautiful from orbit in the way only old imperial capitals could be. Vast oceans of cobalt blue, mountain chains traced with silver snow, cities shining like crowns across entire continents. Orbital rings and defense platforms circled the planet in layered bands, wrapped in shield projectors so advanced they had turned back meteor strikes and invasion fleets for centuries. The Varkashi had built their civilization around one core belief: that power made permanence. Humanity had come to prove otherwise. On the bridge of the HNS Retribution, Admiral Elias Vaughan stood beneath dim tactical lights as the planet filled the forward display. Hundreds of human warships moved with silent precision around him, their formations locking into place at the edge of weapons range. Carriers deployed screens of strike craft. Battleships aligned spinal cannons. Drone barges emptied black swarms into the dark between worlds. Commander Imani Saad glanced up from her console. Dominion Command is hailing on all diplomatic channels. Vaughan did not look away from the planet. Put it through. A Varkashi elder appeared above the center of the bridge, robed in ceremonial iron and gold. The proud arrogance seen in Prefect Sol's face on the moon was gone. What remained was fear trying desperately to wear dignity. "Human Commander," the elder said, "the Dominion is prepared to discuss restitution, ceasefire, and formal inquiry into the Lunar incident." A stillness moved through the bridge. Lunar incident. Not massacre. Not extermination. Not the murder of 12,000 civilians. Incident. Vaughan's face hardened into something colder than anger. You destroyed a civilian colony in full view of Earth. The strike was an error of military interpretation. You targeted schools. The elder faltered. Vaughan stepped closer to the holofield. You hit habitation domes first, then medical wings, then evacuation routes. Do not insult the dead by pretending this was confusion. Around the bridge, not a single human officer moved. The elder drew himself up. If you attack Varkesh Prime, every major power in the spiral will condemn you. Your species will be marked as butchers. Perhaps, Vaughan said, but they will remember why. He cut the channel. Seconds later, a system-wide transmission went out from the human fleet. It did not contain threats. It did not contain demands. It contained footage. Children in low-gravity classrooms laughing as they chased floating paper stars. Doctors in Artemis Bastion's medical dome treating a newborn beneath soft white lights. Families standing at observation glass, looking back at Earth hanging blue over the grey horizon. Then the flashes. The first impact. The second. The firestorm. The end. Every screen on Varkesh Prime carried it. Every defense station. Every war room. Every palace chamber. Humanity made certain the world that had ordered the atrocity saw exactly what it had done. Then the fleet opened fire. The first wave was not aimed at cities. It was aimed at the shield grid. Human battleships hammered projector satellites with kinetic lances that struck like falling suns. Carrier wings cut through orbital defenses in disciplined swarms, sacrificing drones to expose shield nodes for heavier ships. Mines detonated in chain reactions across the ring stations. For 40 minutes, the sky above Varkesh Prime became a cage of white lines, ruptured armor, and expanding debris. Still the shields held. Then Commander Sard spoke, quiet and steady from the tactical pit. Helios lance ready. A silence swept the bridge. This was the weapon hidden even from most of humanity's allies. An array of synchronized solar energy collectors positioned across the system, drawing stellar power into one focused strike. It had been built as a deterrent so terrible no sane leader would ever authorize its use. Vaughn gave the order anyway. The array fired. A single pillar of starfire crossed the void and struck the weakened shield shell above Varkesh Prime. For one blinding second the world shone brighter than its sunlit moon. Then the shield fractured. Cracks of blue-white energy raced across the globe's protective field. The second strike came immediately. This time it hit the surface. An ocean vanished into steam. A continent split in a line of molten light. Cities that had stood for millennia became expanding circles of fire. Atmospheric shock fronts rolled across the planet in burning walls, igniting clouds, forests, towers, ports, everything. From orbit, Varkesh Prime seemed to break apart under the hand of an angry god. No one cheered on the retribution. No one spoke. They only watched as the world that had murdered Artemis Bastion died in the same merciless light it had once visited upon the helpless. And in that terrible silence, every human aboard understood the same thing. This was not victory. It was judgment. Varkesh Prime burned for 11 days. Even after the Helios lance fell silent and the human fleet withdrew to the outer edge of the system, the planet continued to die in slow, unstoppable stages. Its oceans boiled into choking storm clouds. Continents cracked along glowing fault lines visible from orbit. The shattered remains of defense platforms rained back through the atmosphere like metal meteors, leaving brief scars of fire across a world that had once ruled 100 systems through fear. The proud capital of the Varkeshi Dominion was no longer a throne world. It was a warning. Across the galaxy, emergency networks flooded with images no government could suppress. Independent traders, diplomatic observers, and fleeing Dominion officials all carried the same footage. Varkesh Prime wrapped in sheets of flame, its night side glowing red through the smoke of its own ruin. Civilizations that had mocked humanity's softness, its endless debate, its obsession with ethics and restraint, fell silent as the truth settled over them. The humans had not responded like a young species lashing out in grief. They had responded like an old species that had learned exactly how terrible it could become, and chosen, for centuries, not to. Until now. Without its capital, the Varkeshi Dominion collapsed almost immediately. Provincial governors declared emergency independence. Fleet commanders abandoned outer colonies to rush home, only to find there was nothing left to defend. Some surrendered to the nearest human battle group without firing a shot. Others fled into deep space under false transponders, hoping distance might hide them from the consequences of what their empire had done. It did not matter. The war, if it could still be called a war, was already over. On the bridge of the HNS Retribution, Admiral Elias Vaughn received the first formal surrender less than 8 hours after Varkesh Prime fell. Then another. Then 17 more. By the end of the day, every major Dominion fleet still capable of transmission had laid down its arms. Commander Imani Sard stood beside him as the messages stacked one after another across the tactical display. "That's it," she said quietly. "They're finished." Vaughn looked at the wall of surrender markers and said nothing for a long moment. Finally he asked, "How many confirmed at Artemis?" Sard already knew which number he meant. She checked the memorial log, updated from Lunar Salvage Command. 12,106. He closed his eyes once. Not in triumph. Not in relief. Only in acknowledgement. Weeks later, under a pale earthrise, the first memorial ceremony was held on the Moon. The site of Artemis Bastion had been stabilized, but not rebuilt. Engineers had raised a black arch over the outer edge of the crater field, facing the place where the main habitation dome had once stood. Beneath it, carved into polished stone hauled from Earth, were the names of every person lost in the attack: teachers, engineers, botanists, medics, miners, and children. Families came in silence, moving in low gravity past the names with gloved fingers brushing the engraved letters as if touch alone could bring the dead a little closer. No speeches were made at first. No music played. Only the soft hiss of suit systems and the distant hum of machinery rebuilding the new colony beyond the memorial zone. At last Admiral Vaughan stepped forward in dress black, bareheaded beneath the arch, with Earth shining blue behind him in the sky. Cameras from every world carried the image live, but he did not speak to the galaxy. He spoke to the dead. "We failed to save you," he said, his voice steady and low in the lunar stillness. "And because we failed, we chose the darkest answer left to us." He paused, looking over the endless rows of names. "Let no one call this justice and feel pride. Let no one call it mercy and believe it was kind. It was only the promise that no one would do this to our people again and live to try a second time." The words traveled far beyond the Moon. In the years that followed, border disputes with human colonies ended before the first shot. Trade pacts were signed faster. Treaties were honored more carefully. Admirals who once joked about Earth's moral hesitation rewrote their doctrines around one cold fact: humanity preferred peace, but if forced into total war, it would carry that war to the last possible horizon. And on Lunar, beside the memorial at Artemis Bastion, a new colony rose from the dust. Smaller at first. Stronger. Shielded. Its main gate bore a single inscription cut deep into lunar stone. "We were peaceful. We were patient. We were human." And they should have remembered what that meant.